All right, so this lesson is going to show you what the work should look like when you're dividing polynomials. So for example, number one, you're given that this polynomial is being divided by this polynomial. And so when dividing polynomials, you first of all need to make sure that both the divisor, which is this one, and the dividend, which is this one, is both in descending order. All right, so notice this is not in descending order, so we're going to have to write this in descending order. This one is. Now, when writing your answer for this particular problem, they want you to write the answer as the quotient plus the remainder divided by the divisor. So the lowercase d is defined to be the divisor. So it kind of looks like this. So you have your dividend, which we'll call capital D of x, divided by your divisor, which we'll call d of x. And so when you divide these two polynomials, you'll get a quotient, which we'll call q of x. And remember, your quotient, when you do long division, is the part that's above that division symbol right here. So that'll be your quotient. And then plus the remainder, which we'll call r of x, divided by your divisor, which remember is d of x. And so usually when you divide polynomials, they'll ask you to write it like this. Okay? All right, so let's go ahead and do this one. Now remember, you got to make sure it's in descending order in both cases, and there's a little bit of work that you're going to have to do along the way. Some ideas that you've learned from previous courses in terms of dividing monomials. All right, so let's look at the first one. So the first thing you do is you take the first term of your divisor, divide it into the first term of your dividend. So in terms of work, this is what you're doing. So you're saying, let me go ahead and do it on here. So you're saying 6x cubed divided by 2x. And so you know from previous courses that when you're dividing monomials, you know that 6 divided by 2 is 3. And when you divide like bases, you subtract exponents. So this exponent right here is understood to be a 1. So x cubed divided by x is x squared. So 2x divided into 6x cubed is 3x squared. Now I'm going to put this 3x squared in my quotient. So this is your quotient. Now let's go ahead and align like terms. Since this is x squared, I'm going to put it above the x squared column. So I'm going to put 3x squared here. Once you get that one, then you do multiplication. So you do divide and then multiply. So you're going to take what you just found, and you're going to multiply it by every term in your divisor. So 3x squared times, now that's not a subtraction, so make sure you understand that's just a mark, a stray mark. So let me just go ahead real quick and take this stray mark off. Okay, all right. So I'm going to take 3x squared, and then I'm going to multiply it by 2x. So 3 times 2 is 6, and then x squared times x is x cubed. So if you're doing this correctly, when you multiply this by the first term here, you better get this term here that you see here. And we do, so 6x cubed. And then you do the same thing with the next term. 3x squared times a negative 1 is a negative 3x squared. All right, now the next thing you have to do is you're going to have to take these two, this dividend right here, and you're going to subtract what you just found. So you're going to subtract. It's always a good idea to think about what you're doing. Put that in parentheses. You're subtracting all of this. All right, I'm going to leave some space here so I can maybe use it to indicate some items. All right, so what should happen is this. Notice you're saying 6x cubed minus 6x cubed. That is 0, right? So that's all supposed to be 0. So if you're doing this correctly, when you get to this point, that's 0. Now be careful here. Some students have trouble with this. A negative 1x squared subtract a negative 3x squared. And the reason I left some space here, and you don't have to put this, but some students have trouble thinking about this mentally. But a negative 6x squared subtract a negative 3x squared. So remember, you subtract a negative 3x squared, that's really a positive 3x squared. And so a negative 1 and a positive 3, a negative 1, and a positive 3 now is a positive 2x squared. Okay? So if you need to, remember this is what you're doing. So let me just remind you, you're saying a negative x squared subtract a negative 3x squared, right? So that becomes a negative x squared. And remember, when you subtract a negative, you're really adding the opposite. So when you add the opposite of a negative 3x squared, you get a positive 3x squared. And so see this right here? A negative x squared plus 3x squared, that's this, a negative x squared, and then 3x squared. See that? Okay. So if you need to put that, then put that. But this is a process you can go through, and this is what I need to see. Now, you don't have to show this part here, but I do need to see the parentheses. So make sure you show that parentheses, okay? And then since this is what the work should look like, what I'm indicating, I'm going to go ahead at this point and I was going to white out this, but I'm going to go ahead and keep it because some of you may want to make a copy of this as you go through this. All right, so once you get that point, then the next thing you do is bring down the negative 3x. Bring down one of them. Now you can bring down all of it. I'm just going to bring down one at a time, okay? And then you do the process all over again. You do that process all over again. So you're going to say the first term into the first term here. So you're saying 2x squared divided by 2x. Well, 2 divided by 2 is 1 times, and then x squared divided by x is just x, right? So that's x. So 2x squared divided by 2x is just a positive x. I'm going to put that up here. So positive x. So notice I'm aligning my like terms. Once you get that part here, that term in your quotient, then you take that term, multiply by every term in your divisor. So x times 2x is 2x squared. If you're doing this correctly, these two have to be identical. X times a negative 1 is a negative x. And then you see how we subtracted here? You can do the same thing. Put parentheses. I need to see that. Okay. Now, 2x squared subtract 2x squared is 0. That's what you have to have. See, just like this, 0, 0. A negative 3x subtract a negative x. So in your mind, this is what you're thinking, right? You're saying a negative 3x subtract a negative x. Well, remember, that's the same thing as saying negative 3x, and then when you subtract a negative x, you're adding the opposite, so that's plus x. And a negative 3x plus x is a negative 2x. All right? So when you subtract this right here, a negative 3x, subtract a negative x becomes a negative 2x. And then you bring down your next term, right? Like this. And then you do the process again. Now remember, you stop this process whenever the degree of your remainder is less than the degree of your divisor. So remember, we talked about degrees. I'm using the word degree. So remember this word right here, degree. I'm using this word. So the degree of this this divisor is 1. That's the degree of this divisor. The degree of my remainder thus far is 1. So they're the same, so I got to keep on going. You stop whenever the degree of the remainder is less than the degree of the divisor. So now they're still the same. They're the same now, so I keep on going. All right, so go through the process. So you're going to say negative 2x divided by the first term, which is 2x. Well, negative 2x divided by 2x is a negative 1, right? And so now we're going to put this negative 1 here. And so then you do the multiplication all over again. Negative 1 times 2x is a negative 2x. If you're doing this correctly, these two have to be identical, and they are. A negative 1 times a negative 1 is a positive 1. All right? And then you're going to subtract, just like this. All right, and when I subtract, notice that a negative 2x subtract a negative 2x is 0. A positive 1 subtract a positive 1 is 0 as well, so you get a remainder of 0. All right, so notice the remainder, the degree of a constant is 0. The degree of a constant is 0. The degree of this divisor here is 1 that I'm pointing to, so we're done. Now, notice the degree is 0. So all you have to do for the answer, since the remainder is 0, is just say this. The answer is 3x squared plus x minus 1. Or if you want to, since we did say write it in this form, some students will do this. They'll say 3x squared plus x minus 1 plus the remainder divided by the divisor. So either one of those is fine. Okay? All right. All right, so that was number 1. Let's look at number 2. So number 2, we have this problem. So we have 8m cubed minus 57m squared plus 42 divided by 8m plus 7. All right, so we want to divide these two polynomials. So we're going to use long division. And first of all, notice that both of those are in descending order, except notice there's some missing terms. So you see, you don't see an m term here. You have an m cubed, an m squared, a constant, but no m term. So first degree term is missing. So you have to put that missing term in your long division. So when I do my long division, I have 8m plus 7 is my divisor. My dividend in descending order will be 8m cubed minus 57m squared plus 0m. So you need to put that missing term. And then plus 42. And then you do that division all over again, just like you did in the previous problem. So we say first divided by first. So 8m cubed divided by 8m. So 8 divided by 8 is 1. M cubed divided by m is m squared. So 8m divided into 8m cubed is m squared. So I'm going to put m squared in the m squared column. And then we multiply. M squared times 8m is 8m cubed. If you're doing this correctly, those two have to be identical. M squared times 7 is a positive 7m squared. All right, and then we're going to subtract. Okay, so 8m cubed subtract 8m cubed is 0. A negative 57 is what you have, so think about this. A negative 57m squared subtract a positive 7m squared is the same thing as saying negative 57m squared minus 7m squared. So a negative 57 and a negative 7 is a negative 64, right? So I get negative 64m squared. So that goes here, right here, negative 64m squared. And then we rain on the next term, so you're going to say plus 0m. Then you do the process all over again. So you're going to say negative 64 m squared divided by the first term here, which is 8m. A negative 64 divided by 8 is a negative 8. M squared divided by m is m. So I get negative 8m. So that's going to go here. Negative 8m. Notice I'm aligning my like terms. Then we do multiply all over again. Negative 8m times 8m is a negative 64m squared. If you're doing this correctly, those two have to be identical. A negative 8m times a positive 7 is a negative 57m squared, right? I'm sorry, negative 8m times 7, not 7m. So remember, it's negative 8m times 7 is a negative 56m, correct? Negative 56m. Okay, because remember, this is negative 8m, this is just a constant 7. So don't put m squared, it's just m. And then negative 8 times 7 is a negative 56. All right, so then we're going to subtract. All right, so negative 64m squared subtract a negative 64m squared is 0. 0m subtract a negative 56m. So notice what you have. 0m subtract a negative 56m. So you're subtracting a negative, so that means adding the opposite. So 0m plus 56m, which is 56m. And then I do the process all over again. So I'm going to, oops, let's bring down the next term, 42. All right, so then you're going to say 56m divided by 8m, right? So 56m divided by 8m. So 56 divided by 8m. Let me go ahead and write that down. This is what you're saying. You're saying 56m divided by 8m, which is going to be 7, right? Okay, so we're going to put that 7 here. And then we multiply. 7 times 8 is 56m, so those two are supposed to be identical. 7 times 7 is 49, right? And then we subtract. All right, and so 56m, subtract 56m is 0. Remember those, just like we did here, those are supposed to cancel out. 42 subtract 49, so remember what you're seeing, 42 subtract 49 is a negative 7. Now notice the degree of a constant is 0. So the degree here is 0. The degree of my divisor is 1. So since the degree here is less than the degree of the divisor, I cannot go any further. So the answer, you're going to say, will be the quotient, which is m squared, minus 8m plus 7, and then the divisor, so minus 7 divided by, the remainder divided by the divisor. So minus 7 divided by 8m plus 7. Now here's how some other students will write this. They'll say m squared minus 8m plus 7 plus negative 7 divided by 8m plus 7. And that's fine. Does not matter. Okay? All right. So that is what the work should look like when you do the worksheet dealing with dividing polynomials.